It seems like only yesterday that I was over the moon that Marvel Studios had done the unthinkable. They had finally bought Fox, 20th Century Fox, as an entire studio. And as different people had their feelings on that, I thought of one thing. Marvel finally has the X-Men back. Finally, there is some sort of deal in place where they have all of their characters laying in their wake at their disposal, ready to use so that characters like Wolverine and Storm can finally interact with the likes of Spider-Man and Captain America. And I couldn't be more thrilled for the impending MCU X-Men film that I had always dreamed of for so many years. It was said that it would be quite a while before we would get the X-Men characters, and every year I waited on pins and needles for that announcement of the first X-Men movie, for the explanation of how they were going to be integrated into the main MCU. Fast forward to the present day, and I could not be more horrified at the announcement of an X-Men movie. Apparently, they currently have a writer in place, and I read a rumor, just a rumor, that an X-Men movie could be filming in 2026 to be released in 2027. And while it is merely a rumor, there is no reason to believe that it is true based on that. It would not be abnormal for Marvel Studios to take on that pattern of greenlighting a movie 2 years before it is meant to release, shooting it within a year's time, and then somehow working the VFX artists to death to finally get that film out. So I wouldn't put it past them to do an X-Men movie next, especially because it's pretty much the last thing that they have after bringing Robert Downey Jr. back as Victor Von Doom, apparently. But like I said, I am now terrified of this. I am an X-Men super fan. X-Men is become my favorite, that's me saying is and has at the same time, X-Men has become my favorite aspect of the Marvel Universe. I love X-Men. And here's the thing. You guys don't know how good X-Men is. Nobody knows really the true potential of these characters and who they're supposed to be unless they've read the comics, because truly, these characters have never been properly adapted in a movie. Now, there's cartoons out there that have done good job in certain aspects, but still, I would say you do not know the true greatness of these characters and universe unless you have read the comics. And there is reason why I am so personally attached to them and why I am terrified of what a movie could look like. But I guess before we get into that and why I'm scared of an MCU X-Men film right now, we should talk about why I love the X-Men. Why are they so great? Well, once again, you really have to read the comics to know, and I would recommend everyone do so. Now, believe it or not, it used to be that the X-Men were the biggest team franchise in Marvel Comics. Like, Spider-Man and X-Men were what carried Marvel Comics, not the Avengers. And why is that? Why were the Avengers not popular characters in the comic book form while the X-Men really were as a team? Well, if you read Avengers comics, then you'll realize that they're not very much like the movies, at least not the classic ones. It was a constantly changing roster. The characters who were the leads were the B-list heroes like Thor and Captain America, who struggled to be a part of the book consistently because they would have to go back to their own series and just go back and forth from there. It was oftentimes just sort of the reject heroes making up a team. There was a reason why Avengers comics were not the best-selling books and why they were not a true rival to the Justice League. But what made X-Men comics so great? A focus on the personalities and the relationships of the characters first and foremost, and the overall struggle of these characters and the overall metaphor. If you read X-Men comics, what you won't get if you've only seen the movies is that each of these characters had very, very distinct personalities. From Kitty Pryde, who is this spunky 13-year-old girl who proves herself more and more mature as she goes along into this new world, or Storm, who is this character who everyone considers a goddess, but really struggles with trying to be seen more as a human and trying to be allowed to have more human flaws, or Nightcrawler, who is a much more jokey, friendly, fun-loving character in the comics, but also has a religious side to him, or Wolverine, who is a short, boozy guy who's like 200 years old and no one really knows where he's from. Each of the characters from X-Men was very, very well drawn. They all had their very distinct personalities and relationships to each other. And they were all very dimensional and relatable characters. There was an overall relatable theme to it, and it's something that you will get if you watch X-Men TAS, the very first episodes, which is this sort of feeling of being an outcast, of being an outsider, and you're rejected by the world. And you feel like you don't belong, and then you find a bunch of other people who feel like they don't belong. And it's really that sort of catharsis of having that relatability, which of course the X-Men deals with themes like bigotry. Also, the characters have been compared to the experiences that teenagers have as they grow up. They're trying to figure out who they are. They feel like they don't belong. X-Men comics had a lot of depth, and they had a lot of stories that were very intelligent and philosophical. But ultimately, to understand what really made this comic work is that it wasn't really written like a traditional superhero comic. It was written more like a soap opera. And here's an example. The way that traditional X-Men comics were formatted was you would get an arc that would have a lot of action in it, but then you would get a comic that was literally just the characters playing baseball or something. For example, there's an arc where the characters travel to Japan for Wolverine's wedding. They have to fight Silver Samurai, and there's a lot of character work in there in Wolverine accepting Rogue to the team. And then the next comic, issue 174, is literally no action whatsoever. It's just catching up with where the characters are at in their personal lives. What's going on with Kitty Pryde's crush on Colossus, which is a whole nother can of worms? What's going on with Rogue now that she is a member of the team? What is her relationships to these new characters? Absolutely no action whatsoever, just a focus on developing who these people are and where they're at, which makes us care about them so that when we do get a big battle, whatever that may be, we are invested in those characters. As another example, one of the most famous issues that I love from X-Men is X-Men 4, written and drawn by Jim Lee. And it is famous because the entire issue, or at least what's memorable about it, is that it's a basketball game between these four characters who are trying not to use their powers, and then Gambit cheats first and uses his powers. And what it does is this basketball game really develops the personalities of the characters and who they are to each other and where they're going to go next. And that fades into Gambit trying to take Rogue for a date, and then Wolverine wants to come along to make sure that he treats her right, and then Jubilee wants to come along, and then a car chase ensues, and then later at the very end of the comic they get attacked by Omega Red, which is the least interesting thing about it, because the most interesting thing about X-Men comics is how these characters interact with each other and who they are as people. X-Men comics are, once again, soap operas. There is a heavy focus on the relationships, who's dating who, the drama, the family drama behind them, and that is why they were so widely appealing to people. With X-Men comics, the reason why they sold so much is they appealed to everyone. Everyone wanted to read X-Men comics because the characters were so relatable. There's a character for everyone, and the stories were so accessible. And this has just so much potential in movie form. You know, the Avengers were the B-list characters in comics, and they were able to be elevated to the point where they did make a big connection with mainstream audiences. But I tell you, reading X-Men comics, X-Men have the potential to be even bigger than the Avengers. Each character has a potential to be a new A-lister, a new fan favorite icon in the public's eyes because of how good their personalities are, because of how good the relationships are. And with the focus on the characters not just being these big action set pieces, but being their personal lives, the soap opera element, it not only is very widely appealing, that just gives so much potential for people to be immersed in the characters, because fans love that. Fans love imagining what characters get up to on their off days. Fans love imagining all the little minutiae of these characters in their relationships and developments. And X-Men comics give that by allowing them to have all of these casual times where it's not about the action, it's about the characters. But to just circle back to one more thing, yes, X-Men comics, when they did have action, was very intelligent. For example, there is an arc where they meet the Beyonder, who seems like he's the god of the universe, and he seems like he could just mold everything into his image as he would want. And I won't give it away, but it is a very philosophical comic, and it winds up not ending in a big battle. In fact, that is the point at the end of the comic. Not that battles can't be done well, but what I want to say is that X-Men comics just have very intelligent writing behind them, typically, at least at their best. It's also what makes them so interesting to read. Now, if you've only watched the movies, then you won't get any of that. The movies were really only focused on Wolverine, and maybe Professor Xavier and Magneto, but mostly Wolverine. The other characters do not have the dynamic, interesting personalities or even the screen time that the comic books give them. The movies just weren't interested in them. Sometimes when they would give a little screen time to another character like Cyclops or Jean Grey, they would just devolve them into these angry, one-dimensional versions of themselves. Basically, if you've seen the movies, then you haven't really seen X-Men. ever. They've never gotten the elements that made the comic books work onto the screen. They never got the characters right. They never got the development right, which is why I've been desperate for years for to see a comic accurate version of the X-Men on screen. So why am I terrified of the MCU doing an X-Men movie? Well, because with all of the positive things I tried to list about X-Men, they won't be doing any of that. And I've really just been kind of had my heart crushed over the years. I used to think that the X-Men would be the obvious choice for the MCU going forward to bring people's investment back if they could do them right. But the problem is I don't at all expect them to do them right. Now, here's the thing. I thought it was pretty obvious after the Fox movies never really cared for the comics or got any of them right that if you want to do something really different with them going forward as to not mirror those universes, you could merely just be accurate to the comics, as that's what we've never gotten before, and these are good characters who were, unlike the Avengers who were the B-listers, were already very successful. You just need to follow that. But apparently the people who are the powers that be at Marvel Studios don't agree with me. Like, when it came to Fantastic Four, I thought it's pretty obvious. They've never been done right on screen before. You just need to finally do them accurately to who they are in the comics and find how you're going to enhance that in movie form. But apparently there is disagreement there because with the Fantastic Four, the response has been, let's change everything again and go our own way. The characters are doing a retro futuristic Jetsons sort of thing where it seems that there's Easter eggs from the traditional comics, but there are just so many changes that they are making to the characters and miscasts and everything that it really seems that they're just going their own way on it. And it doesn't really excite me with a new version that they're going their own way on. And I'm just so confused as to why they felt that they needed to do this after what the real problem was that they just never even had an accurate Fantastic Four on screen before. But while I can kind of understand while somebody might be confused as to what to do with the Fantastic Four, the X-Men are far more obvious. But with what Kevin Feige has been saying lately, I'm not sure that he believes that any sort of accuracy to the essence of who these characters and stories are in the comics is necessary. For example, he was asked, when are we going to get a new casting for Wolverine finally? And he said it wouldn't be for a very, very long time. They're still trying to mute Hugh Jackman to death. But he said that when we do get a Wolverine on screen, it will be very, very different. Now, here's the thing again. Hugh Jackman, as beloved as he is, was never truly an accurate version of Wolverine. Wolverine is supposed to be a short, boozy, rude little man. And Hugh Jackman was the tall, dark, and handsome, a more personable Wolverine. So if you're gonna do a new version of the character, you would think it would be just so simple to do an accurate version from the comics because we've never gotten that on screen. It will be very different than Hugh Jackman's, but I don't know that that is what Kevin Feige means after Fantastic Four. He seems to be of the idea that the response to the Fox movies is to find something completely different to do, not accurate to the comics whatsoever. So I don't really believe that if they do an MCU movie that it will at all be reflective of the essence of who these characters are in the comics. Will they decide to do the original 5 teenagers with Professor Xavier, even though that era of comics was a total failure? It was the first era of X-Men, and it's why they weren't popular until the 70s when they changed the format. But I have no idea. Will they try to do some sort of a weird alternate universe thing with the X-Men where they're not really recognizable? That's the pattern with Marvel Studios right now. They don't seem to care about comic accuracy. And by that, I mean accurate to the essence of the characters at all. They are convinced that they will go on their own way and be successful that way. So I'm not excited for that because I have no reason to believe that these characters will at all be accurate to the ones I love. So why would I be excited for that? The second reason is this, for lack of a better word, a lack of romance. Now, I've said that X-Men comics are very much a soap opera, and there is a heavy focus on the romances between characters in the comics. I am not expecting that to be adapted at all in the movies with how sterilized the MCU is. And I'll give an example. I was kind of making fun of Marvel Studios the other day. I showed the picnic scene between Gambit and Rogue from the early 90s comics, and I said, avert your eyes! This can't be seen. Marvel Studios wouldn't approve of this. And a lot of people wrote in the comments and said, there's nothing wrong with this. This is clearly just two adults who are in a romantic relationship, just having a little fun with each other. Rogue tells Gambit that she can't be touched because of her powers, and he chases after her instead, which, if she wanted to, she could have thrown him into the sun if she so chose to do, because that's her power. And I agree, to us, there is nothing wrong with this scene, and I always thought it was a cute scene. However, that is your mistake. That is your mistake saying, oh, there's nothing wrong with this. They will find something wrong with it. They are the ones that looked at things like Johnny Storm's classic character and said that needs to be changed. The MCU, as it currently is a sterilized place. They will not have anything out there that could possibly be interpreted by any yokel out there as offensive or just crossing a line, or they don't like that. They need to sterilize everything. So when it comes to the tension between Gambit and Rogue, where that is what their relationship became popular off of in the first place, and that is the starting point of it, where that's that tension between, the character who seems like he's the dirty womanizer and the girl who can't be touched, even though there's more depth to their relationship than that, and that's not what it really is, but you have to start from that position until you get the real development of them. They will look at that, say, that's wrong. Another example, Emma Frost. She is a character who definitely is a femme fatale, and it's actually very core to her character, the way she dresses and how she sexualizes herself and how she uses that, and she's used it for much of her life to get ahead, and how she has allowed herself to be objectified by other people, even though she is a real human being, and how she's been mistreated throughout her life. Like, it's something that actually says something about the character, the way she dresses and how she uses her sexuality and all of that sort of thing. You won't be able to have that. You won't be able to have a comic accurate Emma Frost in these movies at all. I'm not saying that you have to super sexualize her or anything, but what I'm saying is the MCU will likely put her in a frumpy, ugly sweater costume because, once again, they have to be safe. They have to do the safest, most mundane thing possible in order to make sure that no one is offended by anything, so that then in their eyes they can get the most maximum out of the box office. But that's not exciting to me. That's not exciting to not use the dynamics of these characters that actually made these comics interesting. What I said is X-Men comics are interesting because of how dynamic the characters are and how interesting the relationship drama is. Frankly, I'm not expecting them to allow any characters to be attractive in the MCU, especially if the X-Men characters, all of them, the men and the women, are supposed to be that way, but I'm not expecting that from the movies, and I don't mean to sound like a chud, but it just kind of frustrates me that these days we don't even do the bare minimum of making people look good on the screen anymore, because we don't care about any of that. We don't care if you have striking actors, striking costumes, and striking sets and the like. We do everything mundane. We do everything grayed out. We do everything safe, and that is the MCU to a T. Now for the third reason why I am terrified of the MCU doing an X-Men movie on the screen, Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel has been invading the X-Men comics for years now. They retconned her into a mutant, and they are even going so far as to try to retcon her into historic storylines from the X-Men to pretend that she was always there, even though she's never been an X-Men, and her being a mutant was a very recent, very forced development that most people don't agree with. But the reason why they are doing it is because after they abandon the Inhumans, they want to keep Miss Marvel, and they want to set her up so that she will be the MCU's Kitty Pryde. For those who don't know what that means, Kitty Pryde is like the original audience surrogate from the comics. The kid character who gets inducted into the X-Men, and we get to see this world through her eyes as this young person who's coming into this world. Jubilee kind of took that role in the X-Men Task series, and now people are thinking that that is what they intend to do with Miss Marvel as they are trying to retcon her into the X-Men pasts. This does not work at all. Not only is it ridiculous because Miss Marvel, because for a decade of time when Disney did not have the rights to these characters, they were downplaying the X-Men. There is a reason why you can't find a ton of X-Men merchandise. It's not because there wasn't a demand for it. It's because as Marvel, Disney did not have the rights to these characters. With both them and the Fantastic Four, they tried to make them more scarce. They downplayed them and pushed them down in the comics. They tried to make merchandise more scarce. And as such, as they were really pushing the character of Miss Marvel to eventually come to the movies, they didn't really care about developing her with any X-Men characters. They made the characters who were meaningful to her story people like Captain Marvel and the like. So now that they all of a sudden have the rights again and that they're getting rid of the Inhumans, which is what Miss Marvel was, they're doing this really forced retroactive insert of Miss Marvel into the X-Men and pretending that she is meaningful to these characters and this world when she is not. And she doesn't fit for many reasons. Miss Marvel is very much a self-insert fantasy character. She's very happy-go-lucky. She doesn't fit with the burden that the rest of the X-Men carry. She doesn't fit with the mutants who are meant to live in a world that hates and fears them. She's from a family who absolutely adores her and has a fan base that absolutely adores her. So them trying to retroactively say that she is now hated and lives in a world that hates and fears her because she's a mutant does not work. It doesn't fit with the tone of the character or what was established.
Very own superhero, Miss Marvel.
Miss Marvel?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I'm familiar.
This is her, right here. A custom-designed Funko in her honor.
And she's really just invading these books, and she doesn't fit tonally or character-wise with any of the characters. It feels incredibly forced after she made relationships with none of these people to pretend that she all of a sudden has super relevance to Jean Grey or any of these characters. But the only reason I think they're pushing this is because they want Miss Marvel to be that Kitty Pryde character in the X-Men films, and that will kill me. I am not joking. That will kill me. Not only would you maybe be taking away from a character that we should see on screen because we've never gotten an accurate version of Kitty Pryde on screen, and she is a great character. She is one of my favorite characters. She should be the audience surrogate, or if not her, then Jubilee, or both of them. They are the characters who have been X-Men for so many years, and they actually built up fans who love them, and that we would love to see on the screen. And Miss Marvel taking away from them a character that no one likes just because someone behind the scenes keeps wanting to push her, no matter how disinterested people are in her, that is just infuriating beyond the words that I can speak. But even if you weren't using her as a replacement for one of those characters, there are infinitely more characters like Sunspot or Magic or Danny Moonstar, or just so many characters that have existed in X-Men for decades that I would love to see on screen, because there's a lot of great characters, there's limited space, and like literally any of them would be more interesting than Miss Marvel on the X-Men, a team that she doesn't fit with and that she's not going to fit with how they've established her already as a happy-go-lucky superhero whose family loves and supports her with everything she does in the MCU. All of a sudden having her join the X-Men in this hated and feared group, it does not fit whatsoever. But that is what the MCU will do, because they don't seem like they care about these X-Men characters so much. They see them as another IP that could potentially be sold, but the forcing of Miss Marvel on the X-Men when literally no one is asking for that tells me that someone, and it's probably Sana Amanat who created the character, is just forcing her on this. It's not that Miss Marvel is going to be a part of these things because she actually works on the team, or she enhances the team, or she makes sense with any of these characters she had no history with up to this point. It's because someone behind the scenes has ulterior motives, whether it's royalties, whether it's their character that they want to still exist, and that tells me that they just do not care about this franchise and what their fans would want. But right now, if there is going to be an X-Men film anytime soon, you better believe that Miss Marvel will be inserted onto the team, and she will take away from any other character that could have gotten that slot and actually deserved it, actually has been a part of this franchise for decades and is actually a good character with fans. But the fourth reason that I don't want the MCU to do an X-Men film is the lack of creativity. And this kind of goes into the other things that I've been talking about. But, you know, I imagine my personal X-Men film, like maybe they would take a little bit of the aesthetics and the vibes from the Jim Lee 90s era, from the cartoon, you know, that whole hated and and feared, and you're an outcast atmosphere from that. I would hope that they would take that, maybe even take inspiration from those aesthetics and try it to project it onto a film in more of a modern setting. That would be very interesting to me to see that. I would want to see what a director's vision for these very colorful characters would be. Unfortunately, we're not going to get that because MCU films are so corporatized. They hire directors, they cast them in these roles where they're really just carrying out the will of the producers. The producers are the ones that make these films really. And it makes it so even when they feign the idea that they're doing something different, all of these movies have a same feeling. They're not distinct anymore. I would argue the MCU once upon a time had a more of a distinct feeling between each movie franchise, but now it doesn't anymore. I am just expecting monotone coloring, a bland tone, sameness of the MCU, and of course, the ever terrible James Gunn great value humor that they have been slapping on everything. And we already saw that as Gambit was a character taken seriously in X-Men 97, and then the second he got closer to the MCU in this TVA comic that came out, he was used as a joke all over again, because that's what the MCU does. Everything is a joke. The Hulk is no longer a tortured character who has to deal with a dual personality and a rage monster inside of him. He is actually Professor Hulk. He is a joke. Rocket Raccoon is Star-Lord. All of these characters are ultimately used for jokes. The Ant-Man used for jokes. Thor used for jokes. That is what I am expecting them to do with these X-Men characters, because that is what they have been proven to do time and time again. That is what they're doing with Thunderbolts. I'm not saying you can't do an X-Men movie that's more comedic. Excalibur was a more comedic X-Men comic, and there's definitely comedic characters, but it will be in that annoying MCU humor that is just a cancer to everything, and that's really disappointing. Like, for example, perhaps Ryan Coogler might be a good director for the X-Men, as that he's really raising in his profile after Sinners came out. He's proven that he really has a vision, and he's dealt with material where race and racism is the main theme before, and he's worked for Marvel. Unfortunately, I don't expect them to allow him to be himself if he comes back to a Marvel movie. I don't blame Wakanda Forever on him, but he is a director. Well, it's the same thing as if Christopher Nolan was cast to do a Marvel film. Either he would be given control over it, which they wouldn't give him, or he wouldn't do it. Like, they don't actually allow directors with visions to actually control these projects on any level anymore. And that's why it's not particularly exciting to imagine what an X-Men film would be in the MCU, because I'm just expecting it to be a corporatized, safe thing, even though it should be exploding with creativity. And for some other minor notes with this, the MCU as a whole, whether it's the Disney Plus shows or the movies, just have bad writing, bad writers that will not change. It's been a very long time since I watched a film from the MCU that didn't completely fall apart. Even Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I didn't think held up beyond Rocket's storyline, or Deadpool and Wolverine. I'm not a Deadpool fan. I can't judge it based on the humor or those elements, but I honestly did not think that even though Hugh Jackman is giving his best performance of Wolverine that he can give, I did not think that they gave him great writing in that movie either. So, with X-Men comics that do get very intellectual and philosophical at some junctures, how am I supposed to expect that to be transferred over to the films? When was the last time that these characters were treated with true intelligence, or someone really seeing the depth of these characters and not just making the laziest turn your brain off content possible? And right now, what I really see with the superhero genre is a refusal to change. I know a lot of you in my comments are really excited for James Gunn's Superman, but that movie so far just looks like more of the same to me. And I would want an X-Men movie, just has such potential to be something very, very different that people haven't seen before and get them excited again. But despite recognizing that a lot of people are abandoning comic book films, there still does not seem to be a new vision involved. There doesn't seem to be a true willingness to change or to take any risks. And that's why it is just not exciting at all to think of the X-Men in the MCU again. I would just expect, and this is why I get horrified whenever there's a rumored potential casting, that the characters are just going to be ruined again, like everything else that the MCU touches, because that's what they've proven for now what seems to be even longer time than the MCU was popular, and that I really liked it, and that I really had faith that what they were going to do is good. And the X-Men were held hostage by the Fox universe for what's going to be 27 years now, and we're still going back to the Fox universe. You know, Kevin Feige worked on those films, and I don't even know if he thinks that those films were ultimately failures. Maybe they are, in his eyes, what the X-Men should be. Maybe that's part of the reason why we keep going back to them, and that it isn't going to be seen that they need to just be accurate for the new movies coming forward. It's going to be seen that they need to do something completely different than that is not going to be accurate to the essence of these characters, and it is not going to get them right, which is what I'm feeling with Fantastic Four right now. And I don't want to see this destroy the X-Men. And if you are a company, Disney, listen to me. There is such potential with these characters. Trust me, there is such potential with getting this into an X-Mania where there is a massive franchise and fan base of paying customers around these movies. If you have read the actual comics of X-Men, then you'll know what I'm talking about. There is such potential for each of these characters to be marketed. And I won't have a rushed MCU film that is rushing out just to try to get the train running again like they've been, destroy these characters so that they will remain destroyed in non-comic book media for a total of 30 years then. The characters have never been done right on screen, and they deserve to be done right. But right now, I do not have the faith in the MCU as it is to do any of these characters right. Now, if you want to take note of this video and don't do any of the fearful things that I listed, then great. And maybe one day Marvel can make a good X-Men movie, but I am not at all expecting it from the current regime with what they have been doing. And it's changed me from somebody who was excited to have Fox be bought up by Disney so the X-Men could be at home to one horrified because now there's no escape. And I just see them as, instead of characters where they have so much marketability and potential if done right, as another IP that's going to be slain out of greed because they don't actually take the time to consider how to do these characters the right way. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for watching this video. If I was able to do nothing else, I hope maybe sparked some sort of interest in you out of actually reading the X-Men comics and seeing the great characters that these characters are. Thank you all for watching. If you want to support this channel, please consider becoming a patron or a member, and I will see you guys next time.